During this program, we'll learn about the preamble, the words that begin the United States Constitution. It starts, "We the people." We'll talk about why the preamble was written, what it means, and we'll recite the preamble to remind us of our responsibilities. Finally, you'll ask questions about the Constitution. Justice Welch of the Michigan Supreme Court will join us to answer your questions. But let's start by talking about the Constitution itself. It's a document, an official paper that belongs to all of us. This handwritten copy you see was signed in 1787. That's what we're celebrating today. The Constitution is a written plan for government. Some people say it's kind of like a recipe. For example, it says our government must have 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. That's the ingredients. The Constitution also guarantees the rights of citizens, like freedom of speech, and responsibilities like voting. Now, students, I want you to think about this. How many have you have heard of the Constitution? I know it's early in the year, so this might be a new idea. Teachers, this is your first opportunity to respond. Please get a show of hands in your class and send us just the number of yeses that you have in your class. I've heard of the Constitution. Send us those yeses.
So far we have 4 yeses. Ooh, 19. So we're oh, yes. Yep, we're getting a lot of the classrooms in saying yes.
Excellent. I'm so glad that everybody is familiar with the Constitution. You are ahead of the game here. So let's move on. We're going to talk about who wrote the Constitution and why. To set the scene, I'm going to take you back to the Constitutional Convention. It was a special meeting in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in this building. The Revolutionary War was over and the United States was already a country. We had a plan for government, but the plan didn't work very well. In fact, the federal government couldn't pay its bills and states were ready to go to war with each other. Imagine New Jersey fighting New York. So states sent delegates to Philadelphia to fix the plan. It was up to men like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison to bring the United States together. They're sometimes called framers because they wrote or framed the Constitution. Now, imagine you're one of the framers and you're sitting in this very room all summer long with the doors and windows shut without air conditioning. You're assigned to work on a group project, but the delegates don't get there on time. And some leave early because they don't agree with what's being done. Instead of following the assignment, fixing the old plan, they do something different. They start over and write a new Constitution, a totally new plan for government. Think about that. A hot summer and people don't agree on an important project. How would you feel if your class had this assignment? Teachers, get a few feeling words, maybe just one from your class, a feeling word, and send it in the Q&A. How would you feel if this was your class assignment?
One class says hot. Angry. Sweaty and annoyed. Annoyed. Oh, they're annoyed. That's a good one. Yep. Bad stress. Stressed, frustrated. Good words.
Excellent.
Nervous, worried, sweaty, and hot. Miserable, sad, and mad. Those are all very good feeling words. Nervous. That's a good one. Oh, we've got one bored.
All right, I think you guys have the idea. I think probably the founders might have felt all of those things at different times. They probably were also a little excited too. This was pretty important stuff, and that they knew that they were doing important work. But the framers discussed many topics during the convention, and they had to wait to tell everyone till afterwards. That's why the doors and windows were shut. To explain the purpose of the Constitution, they wrote a short preamble. The preamble is the part that most people recognize. It's up at the top, we the people. That shows that the power or the authority of government comes from the people. It's who we are. The preamble also lists big ideas, the purposes of the Constitution, the what we do, and finally, the why. The Constitution will be a lasting document for posterity, for people like you and me who are not even born. This three-part description is one of the ways that students are taught about the parts of the preamble, and I think it's a really great way to think about it. Now, as I said, this handwritten copy is what they finished and signed, but would you believe that the framers wrote different drafts? Their thoughts and words changed as they worked on it. It's like when you write essays and you edit your drafts to make them better and to make your thoughts clearer. Now, to see the changes that the founders or framers had and understand the preamble better, we're going to compare drafts from July and September 1787, when it was signed by the framers. Now, these are historical documents available at the National Archives, and they're just like the handwritten one, but they're a little easier to read. Now, before we compare, I want to point something out that you'll see in the print. We're going to be historical detectives for a moment, and we're going to look at two specific words. I want you to look at the word defense and blessings. Defense uses an F, as in Frank, in the middle. Now, blessings looks a little bit like it has two Fs. They really aren't Fs. They're an old character that stands for the S sound. So don't let that distract you as we go on. Just change it to an S in your mind. Now, let's look at the framers' first draft from July. We'll study it in phrases. First, there is we the people. That's familiar. The people have the power to vote and approve the Constitution. But who are the people? The July preamble lists 13 states: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, if you look at a map, you'll know that these are the first 13 states in the United States listed from north to south. That's the who we are. But can you see? Michigan is way over here. Now, students, I want you to think about this. With the list of 13 states in the preamble, do you feel like you are part of we the people? Teachers, here's another opportunity to take a vote in your class. I'd like you to type in both the numbers of yeses and nos. Is Michigan part of we the people with this version of the preamble? Yes and no. Take a vote.
Well, my first group answered yes. But I have a bigger group here that says no. Some more yeses and nos. It looks like we're leaning towards the no side.
Okay.
Got a lot more no's, it looks like, than yes.
Okay, so now that we've thought about what it says in the preamble with all those states, we're going to look at the very last part. We're going to look at the why. And this is kind of some complicated words: to ordain, declare, and establish the following Constitution for the government of ourselves and our posterity. The posterity are the people yet to come. The Constitution will be our plan for government, and it will be a lasting document. So let's go back to what I said before. Who we are, what we do, and why. This draft from July says we the people have the power and who we are. It also says it will be a lasting document, the why. However, it does not say the purposes of the Constitution, the what we do. Now, remember, the framers had a lot more to do than write the preamble. It's July and it's hot, and they still have many things to decide. They're still working on the what we do. They're debating branches of government, legislative, executive, judicial, and many other things. They talk and they write and they talk and they write, and it gets to September 17th, and they finally have what they think is the best draft they can have. Some delegates are happy and others are not, but they think it's the best they can make it, and most of them decide to sign it. Their talking and debating and writing had changed their thinking. So let's see how their words show their new ideas. We're going to look at the next draft, and which turned out to be the final draft of the preamble. So here's the printed copy. Remember those long S's. And we'll study it phrase by phrase again. Again, it starts, we the people. The people still have the power in their ideas. But who are the people this time? It's the people of the United States, not just the 13 states. Before, it didn't say United States anywhere in the preamble. So this change is important for two reasons. Being united and working together became more important, and more people to be welcomed in the future, not just the ones that were in the 13 states. So let's take another classroom vote. Saying United States in the preamble, does that make you, a student in Michigan, feel like you're part of we the people? Teachers, take a vote in your class and we'll see how our answers might have changed. Is Michigan we the people in this version of the preamble? We'll give you a moment to vote.
We've got 2 classes so far that say completely yes, all yes. So we do have a couple of no's, but mostly yes. So it looks like here we're leaning on the side of mostly yes.
All right, so that's an interesting change that probably some of our framers thought of as well. So here's the next big change. The middle part. The middle part is new. It's the what we do, the purposes of the Constitution. These are big ideas. Now, by talking about the Together for the New Plan for Government, the framers made an important list. These are ideals. They're the best of what the Constitution should do and be, and they're still used and debated in the United States today. It says, we the people want to have a better nation, to have fair laws and courts, and to have peace. We the people want to protect our society, and we the people want to have freedom. Those are the ideas, but we're going to take a close look at the actual words the founders used. First, we have more perfect union, a better nation. We the people also want justice, those fair laws and courts I mentioned. We the people want domestic tranquility, peace in our nation. That's why in our seal, the eagle holds an olive branch. The olive branch is a symbol for peace. We the people want common defense to protect the nation, and that's the arrows. We the people want to promote the general welfare to protect society. And we the people want liberty, freedom, like the symbol, the Statue of Liberty. That's the what we do. It can be hard for everyone to agree on exactly what these words mean, but people like Justice Welch, who will join us in a moment, think about these values written in the Constitution every day. So finally, we're getting to the third and final part, the why. The Constitution will be a plan for government, and it will be a lasting document. It will be for the United States of America, including Michigan. Now, one last thought. The U.S. Constitution is the oldest Constitution still in use, the oldest written Constitution still in use in the entire world. And it's for us. We are the posterity. We are the generations of people the framers knew would follow them, who would use this plan for government. We have the power. We have rights like freedom of speech and responsibilities like voting. But the other thing is the preamble is written in the present tense. So we are also the ourselves, and we have our own posterity to have in the future that will use the plan for government. Now, because we are the people and good government is our responsibility for now and the future, we'll read the preamble together out loud, led by Justice Welch. What I'd like you to do is read aloud in your classrooms like a classroom choir. Read together. The words will appear on the screen line by line, and the S's will look like S's this time. So everyone, in a nice, strong voice, we're going to remind ourselves of our rights and responsibilities. Are we ready? And Justice Welch, you can lead us.
All right, thank you. It is so great to have everyone here virtually and to get to talk to you today. We're going to go ahead and read this incredible preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Thank you, Justice Welch. We're going to find out next what our audience wants to know about the Constitution. And it's possible we might not be able to answer all of your questions live because we have so many groups online, but we're going to forward answers and a recording to our teachers next week. So teachers, you can go ahead and start putting your questions in the Q&A box while I introduce our speaker. Justice Elizabeth M. Welch has served on the Michigan Supreme Court since 2021. She is called a justice because that's the title for a judge of a Supreme Court. Thank you for joining us, Justice Welch.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. And I'm really happy to join everyone today and hear your questions. And if I don't know the answer offhand, I know Rachel often will know a lot of details and we'll jump in, or we will get back to folks.
We do have our first question. It's how old is the Constitution?
So I believe was drafted in 1787 and ratified in 1789. So it depends on how you measure it. It was drafted that hot summer that Rachel talked about. Was that about 230 years? I have to do the math, but so it's pretty old. It's lasted a long time. And as Rachel noted, you know, among democracies on the globe, it's the oldest. So even though in the scheme of civilization, the United States is pretty young, its Constitution has actually withstood a couple of centuries.
Great, thank you for that answer. Our next question is interesting. Why do we need a Constitution?
Yes, that is a really good question. I think Rachel did a good job talking about the reason the group came together that summer is because there were a lot of challenges. We started out with, obviously, after the Declaration of Independence, the colonies broke away from Great Britain and proclaimed that they were going to be independent. And there were lots of concerns about having a powerful presence like a king. The original folks were really concerned about centralized power, like a big government. And so everything started out sort of separate. Each group was governing. And as Rachel talked about, there were some problems with that. How do you defend yourselves? How do you deal with inner relationships with each other? And there was a realization we needed a stronger centralized government to deal with that. So it's like the rules, just like any group you're part of, you need sort of a rule book. And they came up with this idea of a document that's actually not that long, but outlines the basic rules. And I think for any group to run well, you need some rules, and that's what they did.
Great. Next question is, where is the Constitution now?
Yes, it is stored at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It is really, really amazing to go see it if you ever have that opportunity. There is also another amazing field trip is the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, which I've also had the privilege of going to. And they have really great interactive exhibits and do all kinds of things to celebrate the Constitution itself.
That does sound interesting. Next question is, who specifically wrote the Constitution?
There were, I know Rachel showed a picture of all of the delegates that were there. So the various states were able to send delegates. Some sent, everybody I think sent delegates, I think except Rhode Island, but not everybody signed it. So there were people there who chose not to sign the document. And they were all just people that were chosen by each of the states to send folks to Philadelphia that summer.
Great, these are all great questions, and thank you for your answers, Justice Welch. We do have a couple. There's one that says, will we ever be making another Constitution?
That's a great question, and people actually debate that a lot. We have a Constitution that has 27 amendments, which actually isn't that many. Our states, just to give an example, we have state constitutions. State constitutions all over the country have been amended 8,000 times. So it's very, very different. We don't change our Constitution very much. There are people who talk about doing that and whether we should try to create a different document. There's actually a lot of discussion about that. It would be hard to do because you have to have agreement among the states to do that. So I wouldn't expect it to happen anytime soon, but it certainly could happen.
Great. There's another question also that kind of follows along with that. Can you update the Constitution?
Right. That's the amendment process where the various states can support an amendment. And that's how we got all of the amendments that exist. So yes, it can be updated, and in fact is updated. Not super frequently, but it absolutely can be updated. And I think there will be, probably through history, there probably will be more amendments. And I think that's important. That process is really important because obviously the document is old and things change, and the various states can support that if they want to.
Great. How many times, in talking about changing, how many times was it changed before it was ratified?
Oh gosh, I don't know that. There were, I mean, they were working that summer. There's the stories from that summer are really quite legend. We know from exactly what Rachel was talking about in her presentation that it was very hot. I have to imagine incredibly stressful. It's really remarkable they came to an agreement at the end. So I don't know how many drafts were actually put together that particular summer. And then obviously in 1789, the states ratified that draft, but I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know if we have a complete clear idea. I'm sure there are examples of drafts through, in the archives, but I don't know the answer to how many.
Sure. This is an interesting question too. Why was the Constitution handwritten?
Well, that was in the 1700s. That was the only way to convey ideas. We didn't have computers. There was no typing. There weren't even copy machines really back then. So there were ways to disseminate pamphlets and some ideas of copying that we think of, but nothing like what we all know today. There was no social media, there was no email even, or internet. So getting ideas out was hard. And obviously they drafted this document and then they had to make sure they had copies they could take back to their home states and convince everybody this is a good idea. So yeah, it was very, very different. It's really remarkable in the age we live in now to comprehend how information spread. And yet it did.
Great. Another interesting question too, why did they include the preamble in the Constitution?
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting because if you read the Declaration of Independence, where the decision was made to become an independent nation, there's similar themes. It's the aspirational goals of what we want to be, and it sort of sets the table. Then everything follows from that. But it's a lot of times you'll hear about. If you're part of groups, they have something called a mission statement, or your schools probably have a plan and they have goals for what they overall want to achieve for educating you. And that's really what that preamble does. It sort of sets the big goal. So when you're sitting there in that hall drafting a document, it's always helpful to look back at what was our goal? What is our end goal here? And I think that's why it's important. It's important we keep it in mind as we make decisions for our future.
Sure. We did talk about the when, but I do have a question. Where did it happen? So where did the Constitution, where was that written?
That was in Philadelphia. So you can actually go near where that Constitution Center I was talking about, you can actually go and tour the actual room that they were all in. And it is maintained exactly as it existed during that summer.
Great. Another question. Did all of the states approve the Constitution?
I don't, and Rachel can jump in and help me here. I don't believe they all did. I think there were a few or there was maybe one holdout. I don't remember if I think the delegates from New York didn't, or I can't remember. I actually don't remember who signed and who didn't.
I can jump in here. Rhode Island said we
Rhode
can't
Island.
make it. So it was 12 of the 13 states were able to send delegates, but then many of the states that sent delegates, their delegates came back home because they didn't want to sign it. And then there were, of course, the few at the end who spent the whole time there that chose not to sign it even after they had spent the whole summer in Philadelphia.
Right. So some people in the end didn't completely agree. And you could have a split even among the states, like who was there.
Great. Okay, next question. Interesting. Also, what was the Constitution made of? What kind of paper?
Oh.
Do we know that?
Is it like parchment paper or something? I'm assuming.
Yes, it is. And I can send the National Archives has a link to about how the person copied it and all that information. So I will use that as a follow-up. But yes, it was parchment. You are correct, Justice Welch.
Another interesting question directly about the preamble. Would the preamble ever need to be updated?
I mean, I suppose theoretically it could be amended, but I don't know. I think that's up to what we the people want to do with it. I think it's aspirational. It does seem to cover a lot and gives room for the Constitution to be what we want it to be.
Great. And what are the names of the people or some of the people who wrote the Constitution?
I'm going to defer to Rachel on that. There is a very specific list. I mean, obviously, there was a great graphic picture that she showed that had Ben Franklin and James Madison and Hamilton and, some of the names that we all have come to know, but there's a whole bunch more that a lot of people forget. There's names that you'll hear their last names and you'll think, oh, there's cities named after that person. So they were all very, very important from where they were from, but a lot of times they just haven't, they didn't necessarily have a musical named after them. So maybe they're not as well known.
Great. There's one interesting question here. We're talking about paper and how old the Constitution is. Would the Constitution turn to dust if we touched it? Should we touch it?
Yeah, so if you actually go see the Constitution, it's under protective glass. You can't touch it. And that's exactly why. If paper is touched over and over and over through centuries, it does start to disintegrate. It wouldn't just right away turn to dust, but what would happen is it would wear down, probably the words would fade. Even you may know, like if you have a picture in your room and the sun hits the picture really fades over time. And it's the same with any document like that. So they make sure that the glass protects it from people touching it, but also sun to make sure that it's not further damaged after all these years. So it would disintegrate over time. So we make sure we protect it so that doesn't happen.
Great. Another good question. Who had the idea to write the Constitution?
Oh gosh, I think largely it was that group of folks who did come together. There was a core group that realized things weren't working great. Initially, the different groups weren't getting along well. I talked about the need to figure out how to raise revenue, taxes, and I think a lot of that core group. So the same people who were core people involved with drafting often came up with the idea as well.
Okay, and another good question here. Do we vote for new parts of the Constitution?
So the way it works is the states themselves ratify it. So the legislatures have to vote to change the state. Each state has to agree to change the Constitution, and that's done through our legislatures, the people we elect in our state. So it's not, it doesn't go on a ballot the same way. Actually, it can in Michigan. In Michigan, we have a direct change that goes right on the ballot.
Great. And another question, does somebody own the Constitution, or who owns the Constitution?
So I would say we all own it, but not in the way that you can go just borrow it and walk around with it. It actually is housed at the National Archives, which is a government building that is on property that anybody can walk into for free. You don't even have to pay. So, but you have to wait in line and maybe get tickets. And but it does belong to all of us. It's housed at one of our government buildings that the public can go into.
Great. And did people sign the Constitution like the Declaration of Independence? Was that a similar?
Yes, I believe so. I'm trying to think. I think there's the signatures at the end. That's a good question because I actually always think of the Declaration. So yes, I believe they did.
Great. And I think, Justice Welch, this may be kind of directly to you. What do you do on a day-to-day basis as part of your job?
Yes, that's a great question. So we are, the Michigan Supreme Court is the final court in Michigan. Most cases in our third branch of government, the Constitution sets out 3 branches of government, the U.S. Constitution, then we have something called the Michigan Constitution. And we have courts, and you have local courts near where you live. If someone gets accused of something, or if 2 neighbors disagree with each other, they maybe file lawsuits to try to figure out who is going to win, and they go to court. So you have local judges who help with that. If people aren't happy with how that decision goes, they can appeal and they can go to the next level of court. And then after that, there's one more level, and that's where I sit. It's the Michigan Supreme Court in Lansing. And we decide all the cases. We're the final say in the state of Michigan for cases. And we actually, we have to follow the laws that another branch, the legislative branch, passes at the Capitol in the state. But we also are bound by the laws that come out of Washington, D.C. and our U.S. Constitution. So we often have issues that are that involve matters that our U.S. Constitution talks about, people's rights. And so those cases come before us. We look at both the United States Constitution, but also Michigan's Constitution. We look at both things. So we basically decide cases every day between people and groups in the state of Michigan.
Great. So going back to the Constitution, do we know how many people worked to create the Constitution?
I think was it 27 delegates? I can't remember, Rachel, the exact number. You guys are pushing me. Yeah.
It depends on how you count it, because there were the ones that were elected. So there were 54, I think, but only 39 came and all of that. So I will send the list of delegates and who stayed and all of that to our teachers. So it's one of those that doesn't have just one answer to it.
Great. A little bit of maybe a history question here. Were we fighting against Britain when the Constitution was written?
I don't know the exact timing. No, we weren't in the middle of, gosh, I'm actually not sure of the exact dates, but we weren't at the Declaration of Independence had already happened. So this was a different process.
Great. And kind of going along with that, maybe how old is the United States?
Well, it depends on when you say, again, people sort of measure that from different times. We celebrate Independence Day. We look at, 1776 as a date that a lot of us think that's when we became independent. Obviously, the Constitution was created after that. So it just depends on how you measure. Most people, I think, measure from the time that we said, we are independent, we are a separate nation.
Great. And we had two of these questions interesting now that we are moving from summer to fall, but why did they keep the windows and doors closed? It was so hot.
I actually don't know the answer to that entirely. I'm guessing there was a privacy concern. It was a very private matter, and lots of heated debates. It was definitely challenging topics they were covering. So I think I'm guessing that was the primary reason. But maybe Rachel has more thoughts on that. I don't know.
For the most part, that's what people talk about. They were really concerned that it was something that was very controversial, and they wanted to make sure that everybody had a way to talk about it. And maybe Justice Welch, since some of the things that you do as a justice, you have debates and you want to have have sort of a free conversation. You could maybe even interject how that might be similar to your job.
Right. I mean, I think it's when you're talking about hard issues, you want people to be honest. And when you're in a room where you're all doing the same thing together, you need to be able to have those important conversations and have confidentiality so people can be honest with one another.
Great. Excellent answer to that question. And I do have, let's see, we've got two more questions. How long were they in the room to make decisions about the Constitution?
I think they had so actual days, I suspect, went quite long. These folks were from, really quite far away by today's standards. They'd have to get there by horse and buggy. And so they worked long days to try to get this worked out, but it stretched over a few months. So they were there for, was it May to September, I think? So it was but it was over that summer. So a few months.
Great. And one last question. Before the Constitution, how did the government work or know what to do?
Yeah, that was one of the problems, is you had these individual states basically each doing their own thing, and they weren't working together. And that was with an understandable reason. When the Declaration of Independence happened and folks were trying to figure out how to form a government, they were really nervous about having a strong central government because, of course, they had just broken away from Great Britain and a king, and they were worried about a strong government looking the same way. So they worked together into this Articles of Confederation, where they basically were the states trying to work together without a strong government at all, very little centralized control. And they realized they needed some form of strong central government for at least some things. And there have been debates ever since then on how strong the federal government should be. The debates that happened then are still happening now. So very, very similar.
Great. And I think that was our last question. I'm not sure if there's anything else that you wanted to add, Justice Welch, for the classes.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things I just wanted to talk about is just why is this important? Why are we even talking about this? It's this old document. Why does it matter? Right. So I think the words that we read today show the best that we can be. It doesn't mean we always get it right. There's lots about those hot days that a lot of us would disagree with quite vehemently. Some of the decisions they made. We maybe would have made a different decision today. We know the room didn't represent, I'm a female, and there were only men in that room. So there's a lot that has changed in how we govern now. But I think what's important is that preamble is the goals of what we can be, that we're striving to be a more perfect union. It's an ongoing project. It doesn't end. It's not like that day they wrote a document and then they were finished. They weren't finished. In fact, we still had to pass a whole bunch of amendments and the Bill of Rights, which you all will talk more about as you learn more about the Constitution and the protections that individuals felt they needed that the first document didn't have. And then we added more rights as time went on. After slavery ended and after for women getting the right to vote. So there were lots of changes that happened over time to help us strive towards the ideal. And I think that's the important thing, is making sure we keep working to be better. And what that is changes through time. And it's up to all of you. It's only an idea on paper. Everything there is just ideas. And we have to believe in those ideas, and we have to believe in our government systems to make those ideas happen. And the only way to do that is we the people. We are the individuals who collectively form we the people and help with democracy by getting involved in all different ways as you grow older. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all.
Thank you, Justice Welch. We're so glad you were able to join us and answer everybody's questions. We managed to get through all of them, and I want to thank you for helping us celebrate Constitution Day. Thank you.
My pleasure. Absolutely.